Well, from a flow of goods to a flow of ideas, great potential there in the distribution space and supply chain for innovative cooperation flagged by Christian Kohlpeintner just some days ago when we were speaking. Well, which leads us into our next session on reimagining the supply chain through digitization. And Dirk Verstraeten, who's senior expert logistics at Covestro, many of you will know him, and he's also chair of the EPCA Supply Chain Program Committee, is going to take over for the introduction. So I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Dirk, and the floor is yours. I wish you all a very successful session with Anne Vereke.
Thank you, Karen, for your kind introduction. Also, a very warm welcome from my side to our virtual Supply Chain Reimagined session. This year, indeed, we have a totally different format. But in essence, we are basically continuing our journey along the path of digitization, sustainability, and circular economy. Over the last year, we have enlarged our supply chain program committee with digital companies and engaged with them all kinds of digital experts in the newly created digital advisory body. The aim was to bring in more outside-in perspective, and again, identify best practices that can be transferred to our industry. Thanks to their contribution, we organized 2 virtual workshops dedicated to highlight available technologies and motivate actors in the petrochemical supply chain to look for solutions that will ultimately contribute to making the sector more circular and sustainable. We invited sustainable and circular experts from within, but also from outside our community, including even downstream waste treatment companies and textile industry. The purpose, again, to inspire us all with examples of innovative solutions and who knows, even trigger a closer collaboration and interaction towards a more sustainable supply chain. We truly hope that all these activities create value for you, our valued members. It is now my great honor to pass the word on to Professor Anne Vereke from Vlerik Business School, who will present the results of our activities. And at the same time, after that, she will moderate an interesting panel discussion with some of the participants of our workshops. Enjoy the session, and over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Dirk, for your kind introduction, and good day to the audience from my side as well. I will indeed share the insights that we gained from our journey to create a more sustainable petrochemical supply chain through digital innovation. A mouthful, but let me start by explaining to you why we embarked on this journey. And since I think that a picture speaks more than 1,000 words, I'm going to show you a couple of pictures. Next, please. This is a picture of the flood in 2017, which I'm sure we all remember. There was too much water, and there is in some regions of the world. On the next picture, you will see that there's other regions of the world where there's simply not enough water, even extreme drought. And then on the next picture, you will see that, well, we've had fires, extreme fires in so many other places of the world. So it's clear that climate change, it touches the lives of so many people, and entire communities are hit by the consequences of climate change. So we think that we have a moral duty to reduce the ecological footprint of our supply chains, knowing that our supply chains are quite polluting. Now, next, please. In addition to the moral duty, there is also an economic reason for drastically reducing the footprint of our supply chains. On the graph here, you see that natural disasters have become more and more frequent. And this has an impact on our jobs. It has an impact on our businesses. So these disasters, they cause disruptions, and disruptions, they come at a cost. So there's on the one hand a human cost, which should be our first concern, but there's on the other hand also an economic cost. And next, please. It will come as no surprise that there is quite some pressure. There is pressure from consumers in the first place, and in particular the younger generations who are a driving force for change and who ask for greener products. There's pressure, as you see on the next slide, also from consumers, from customers rather, our customers who deliver our goods to the consumers downstream from where the petrochemical companies are. There's also pressure coming from investors who want to decarbonize their portfolio. And last but not least, there is pressure from regulators, for example, the Green Deal and new legislations who force us into making a change. So time has come to reimagine our supply chain. Next, please. And in this session, we actually aim to give you inspiration which we hope will make you reflect on how to adopt these ideas in your supply chain. And we truly hope that this will lead to some implementation and to actions that will improve the ecological footprint of our supply chains. Next, please. I would like to stress that I'm going to take a supply chain perspective. So from the upstream petrochemical companies, the producers, over the chemical companies to the downstream users of the chemical products. For example, fast-moving consumer goods companies who rely on the petrochemical supply chain for the packaging of their goods. And the focus of our work has been on how can we improve the environmental footprint of this supply chain, so of the entire supply chain, and on how digital technologies can help us do so. Now, basically, this raises two questions, as you can see on the next slide. The first question is whether we can make the supply chain as it is more eco-efficient. So whether we can improve each step in the supply chain and reduce its ecological footprint. And we strongly believe that gains can be derived from strengthening the link between supply chain partners. Connecting the dots is what we think can bring significant improvements, albeit a challenge to do so. So that's the first question. The next question on the next slide is whether we can change the structure of the supply chain from being linear to being circular. And the question to raise here is, can we create loops? Where can we create loops? And can we reuse material? Can we recycle material? Next, please. Knowing that only 9% of the plastic that has been produced over the past 70 years has been recycled, this must be an avenue that has tremendous potential. And we can look at it as a threat. If we recycle more, we produce less, we sell less, so it will hurt profitability. We can also look at it as an opportunity. The circular economy can be an engine for growth. It can stimulate us to develop new products that are recyclable. It pushes us to think about new ways of production, about new ways of transportation. It makes us even think about new business models that could totally change the way of working and that could help us tap into new markets. Next, please. So these two questions, they have been the subject of discussions in two workshops that we held over summer. Workshops with participants representing all steps in your supply chain, from upstream to downstream. And with the participants, we have explored how to make the supply chain more eco-efficient and how to make it more linear, more circular, sorry. Next, please. And we have explored how digital technologies can facilitate the move towards a more sustainable and a more smart supply chain. And we talked about platforms, we talked about the cloud, we talked about data analytics and AI, to name just a few of these digital technologies. And an interesting set of potential initiatives have emerged from these workshops. I'm going to highlight two of these ideas for action that emerge from the workshops, the ones that I believe really speak to the imagination, and the ones I hope that will inspire you to embark on such a journey. Next, please. The first idea was to create a smart emission calculator or even simulator, a simulator that will provide visibility of the ecological footprint of transportation from, let's say, A to B, across different modes of transportation, across different providers of transportation. And this would allow us, if we would have such a simulator, to choose the route to go from A to B, a choice that we typically do based on time and based on cost, but where we could bring the footprint into the equation. So what would that look like then, such a smart emissions simulator? Well, with the help of Ovinto, we actually have built a mock-up of such a smart emission simulator. And here's a sneak preview of that mock-up. You should imagine for a minute that I have a load of 12 containers and that I would like to ship this load from Southampton to the port of Amsterdam. Now, on the next slide, you will see the first option that my smart emissions simulator will suggest to me. It tells me that I can go to Le Havre by ship. It has actually identified a small container vessel that has capacity available for my 12 containers. And from Le Havre, my load can then continue its journey to the port of Antwerp by train. That's option one. Option two on the next slide is to drive to Calais by diesel trucks, to go through the Eurotunnel and then take the train from Calais to Antwerp. My simulator would also give me a third option that it has identified. Next slide, please. That option is to go by truck all the way from Southampton to Antwerp through the Eurotunnel. Next, please. Now, which of these three options would be the preferred one from a sustainability perspective? Well, that's what our simulator has calculated for us. Next, please. It has calculated the CO2 and the NOx, as you can see here, for the three different routes. Now, our calculations may not be very accurate, given that we don't have a platform of data. That is what we would need to be able to do the calculations really accurately. So this would have to be built. But with the information that we have, what does it tell us? You actually, on the next slide, can see the results here in a bit of a graphical way. And you see that our routes have quite a difference in terms of CO2 and in terms of NOx. So it helps us, it would help us to make informed decisions, because now I can decide which route to choose, trading off its cost and its emissions. But also it highlights some interesting questions that I could raise now. For example, can I not find a more green, a more clean ship to do the transportation to Le Havre? And how much would we then gain in terms of emissions, and at what cost would that be? So all sorts of insights that I would get from this smart emission simulator. However, next slide, please. For this, we would need data. So it starts with sharing data. It starts with putting that data available on a platform. And once we have that data, we can offer the transparency. We can calculate the emissions end to end, and we could share those emissions. We could share that information with our customers and ultimately even with the consumer. And finally, it would allow us to optimize the footprint of our supply chain and minimize its ecological footprint. Now, that is one idea that emerged. There's a second idea, next slide please, that I would like to share with you. And this one is about bringing circularity into the supply chain. Imagine that we as consumers, we could find an efficient way to dispose of items that we don't need it anymore. An old mattress, tires, a piece of garden furniture. And we would like to have the guarantee that this item will be reused and will be recycled in the most optimal way. What would be needed to accomplish this? Well, here's an idea that emerged from the workshop, and I visualize it on the next slide, please. The participants even gave it a name. They called it Connecting the Dots as a potential initiative. What it would take is we would need a social media platform on which consumers can signal that they have a product, an old mattress, for example, that they want to dispose of. And then a partner company would come to our homes and would collect the mattress, making sure it ends up in the right return flow. And for this, the product would be taken to a sorting center from where it would find its way into processing and processing factories, where the material would come out to be reused into new products that would go to the same or different consumers. Now, obviously, for this to work, we would need AI, artificial intelligence, we would need data analytics to make it work, and we would have to think about the governance structure, and we would probably also need new legislation to make all this work. But still, I think this was a cool idea that came out of discussions, workshops with your colleagues in the supply chain. So these are just a few ideas, 2 ideas that emerged from these workshops, from these brainstorms. We hope they can inspire you, as I already said in the beginning. I really invite you to think about what you could initiate if you would partner up with your partners in your supply chain. But maybe even more important, or as important at least as the ideas that came out, were some lessons learned. And next slide, please. Lessons learned from the discussions in the workshop. We actually all agreed that the first step, which strangely so I show here as a second step, but the first step is dreaming of before we even dream of optimizing the supply chain, is to share data. Data sharing in order to create visibility. If we don't measure, we don't know. And if we don't know, we can't improve, was the idea. So let's start by creating this transparency on emissions, on energy use, on material use, down to the final customer. And for this, we need data, indeed. And sharing data, therefore, is crucial. This again and again was mentioned as a major barrier. The reluctance to be open and to share data. Why is there that reluctance? What explains it? Well, next slide, please. The need for trust actually comes first. The need to identify partners that we can trust, or to create and use tools that create trust. So that's where it starts. And if and when trust has been established, when data is shared, when visibility has been created, then you can start to truly collaborate with your partners. Next slide, please. A key takeaway for me is actually the richness of the data that came out of the discussions in the workshops with representatives of other sectors. Next slide, please. What I show you here is that downstream of the typical petrochemical and chemical companies, you have a couple of sectors that have really, truly creative ideas. And we had them as representatives in our workshops. And actually, there was a wealth of inspiration that came out from talking to people from these sectors. What are these sectors? Well, the textile sector, for example, construction, fast-moving consumer goods and packaging companies, and also retail companies. They are closer to the consumer. They feel this drive from the consumer sooner than the companies that are upstream. And they can be a source of inspiration for us, in particular when it comes to circularity initiatives. With that inspiration, next slide, please, opportunities for improvement will pop up. And there are plenty, we are convinced of that. We just need to tap into sources of inspiration. Next slide, please. And finally, to reach our goals, we need to build ecosystems. And this goes beyond the traditional supply chain. The supply chain of the future will probably not look like the pictures I've shown you now of a supply chain. Next slide, please. They probably will look more like this here, a true ecosystem involving many, many partners that together we collaborate with. Next slide, please. Now, this journey for sure will require investments, and someone will have to take the lead. To create the ecosystem so that others can join the ecosystem, take the lead to partner up with other partners in the supply chain. And this actually brings me, next slide please, to the panel that we have invited. Based on what I shared with you, it will come as no surprise that I would like to put 4 questions on the table for our panel members. So let me tell you what those questions are, and let me introduce our panel members to you. First of all, we have concluded, I told you, that trust and data sharing are the foundations of any supply chain collaboration. And Mark Noordhoek from Nextport will share his golden principles for data sharing with us. Mark will be followed by Mark again. The other Mark Loeffler from Mauser Packaging Solutions will talk about what it takes to take the lead. This is a company that took the lead in embarking on a truly transformative way of working to make the supply chain more circular, and Mark Loeffler will tell us all about that. As a third panel member, we have invited Laura Nieboer from SABIC. Laura will actually tell us about the collaboration of SABIC and Tesco. And this, I believe, is an excellent example of collaboration across the supply chain of an upstream producer, SABIC, and a downstream retailer, Tesco. And then finally, I believe we can learn a lot from Julie Littard. Julie is at European Spinning Group, company in the textile industry, and she has been building an ecosystem from within the textile industry. Again, I think a story we can learn from. So first, I would like to give the floor to Mark, who will talk about the principles for data sharing. And should I remind you of the fact that you're very welcome to post your questions to the panel members. We will address your questions at the end of the session. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you all, the EPCA community, for hosting and attending the panel discussion. I think it's really most encouraging to see that many companies in the petrochemical supply chain are now well on their way on the digital transformation journey and are preparing themselves for digital connectivity with stakeholders and customers across the supply chain. From the digital cafe workshops and the EPCA Flerik reports, we've seen a great number of examples where the adaptation of modern digital and connectivity technologies leverages data available in the supply chain. And we can see these parties are starting to enjoy direct benefits of data sharing in the form of productivity, efficiency, and sustainability gains. An ever greater number of companies is gathering more and more data through IoT, cloud, and other digital technologies to provide their customers and supply chain partners with real-time insights, which is very much needed to supply chain. And can anyone hear me? Hello? Sorry, I was lost for a moment. Sorry there. Can everybody hear me again?
Sure. We can hear you.
Okay, sorry for that. So an ever greater number of companies is gathering more and more data through IoT, cloud, and other digital technologies to provide their customers and supply chain partners with real-time insights, which is needed to optimize supply chains and reduce carbon footprint. We can see public and private data is the new oil, or perhaps better, we see it as sunlight. Because sunlight is available in abundance, it does not need to be hoarded, but can be enjoyed on equal terms by all stakeholders. But our personal and company data is of high value to us, and to our customers, and to our supply chain partners. Hence, we would like our data to be protected and secured so we can control who gets to see the data at what terms. As the number of requests for data API connectivity is growing very fast, it will become increasingly difficult for all of us to manage our data connectivity securely and keep control of our data exchange. Hence, we suggest 5 golden principles. And please, the next slide. By which we can ensure secure data exchange, where we as data owners, providers, and users are protected at all times. We consider these principles to be of an absolute prerequisite for data to be shared in abundance, where we can all benefit from having safe and secure access to data that we have agreed to receive. These golden principles are open access, first of all, because through digital handshakes between data user and provider, or through data sharing communities, we can together set rules of engagement and agree on the terms for sharing data. Secondly, a low entry barrier, both technically and financially. Whether you are a global chemical producer or you have a family-owned business with 2 trucks, we all should be able to make use of the same technical functionality at minimum cost levels so that the benefits of platform-enabled data sharing are improving all of our bottom lines. Thirdly, data governance. High-end and vetted technology should be in place for identity access management, trusted digital handshakes, and personal vault infrastructure in order to safeguard secure and trusted data sharing. Fourth, very important, neutrality. The data sharing platform should be separated from the application layer. At the application layer, we see multiple commercial developments currently taking place, and this will increase rapidly over time. So we will have an ample choice, which is always good. This way, we are ensured of the neutrality of the platform and remain master of decisions as to which applications or data provider we would like to work with. And the last golden principle is co-creation. So data shared among supply chain stakeholders should benefit all stakeholders equal to their contribution by co-creation in ecosystems. The technology is ready currently. It's proven. It's audited and vetted against the highest security standards. The platform is currently scaling globally to facilitate acceleration of connectivity. We sincerely look forward that our petrochemical supply chain community can truly benefit from more data visibility and transparency in order to collectively reduce our ecological footprint while improving our supply chain. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to answer your questions later on during this panel discussion and look forward to engaging with you directly to see how we can help you in your digital connectivity journey. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing these golden principles of data sharing with us. And indeed, we will come back to you in our panel later with a couple of questions. I now would like to move from the first Mark to the second Mark. Mark Loeffler from Mauser Packaging Solutions, who, as I mentioned, will talk about taking the lead in such initiatives. Mark, you have the floor.
Yeah, hello to everyone. I have the pleasure to take you to a journey of 100 years of industrial packaging history and less than 20 years of company transformation. Next, please. Yeah, Alfons Mauser started his packaging business in Germany at a time when chemicals were transported in glass bottles surrounded with wooden baskets. So in 1903, Mauser invented the first all-steel drum called the annealing drum. This innovation has been the basis for the entire Mauser business and has been regarded as the beginning of modern industrial packaging production. A major breakthrough in plastic packaging was a series of plastic cans for the lube oil and chemical business developed in the 1960 years. The well-known Mauser L-ring drum, a blow-molded tight head drum, was invented a couple of years later. In parallel, Mauser did build its own blow molding equipment and sold machines to third-party companies together with a license to produce plastic drums. Mauser as such was just slightly extending its own footprint in countries around Germany. So in the beginning of the 2000 years, the company was financially in a bad shape. It was too big to compete with local packaging companies in the marketplace, and was too small to be considered as a global player. Also, the portfolio was not complete. Mauser simply missed the boat with the IBC development. Their idea was that the packaging has to be blue and round. So the Mauser family took the decision to step out of the business and sold the company to our first private equity partner. With now having enough equity, the new Mauser bought multiple license companies around the globe, and also acquired the second largest IBC manufacturer. The IBC is a perfect packaging for circular economy, and IBC reconditioning was already known in the market. Therefore, Mauser acquired also a large reconditioner on the US market. Next page, please. So that was the beginning in the first steps in packaging lifecycle management. And we as a company noticed that this model, which worked in the US, will work also in other regions, and what worked for the IBC will be also working for other packaging types. It's really closing the loop, collecting the packaging, the used packaging from the market, give it a new life. So the vision was born to become a world-leading packaging company for life cycle management. And we defined a strategy to become a world-leading company. And as nature of private equity is to bring a company in a better position, oriented for the future. So Mauser had been sold to our next private equity partner. Next page, please. Where are we today? So the company, which was close to bankruptcy in 2000, is now a leader in industrial packaging. We executed a build and buy strategy by taking over reconditioners all over the globe, doing greenfield investments. We adapted our strategies in reconditioning, put new services to the market, such as fleet management, laundry service for packaging. We also started our PCR operations in 2014. So the plastics we were collecting from the market, give it a new life. So by doing plastic recycling, we also adapted our blow molding technology and invented new packaging types. The drum shown here on the slide is a classical L-ring drum. However, the layers are 3-layer technology. So we are using virgin material on the inside, using the PCR we generate in our factories. In the middle layer, it counts for 60%. And then again, virgin material on the outside. The drum appears like a normal drum. However, it has a much better carbon footprint, uses less raw materials, and performs like a standard drum. So that is an interesting way to go forward. And I'm going to show you on the next page what we have done and what we collect on a yearly basis. We are collecting more than 4 million IBCs and 10 million drums out of the market. Just to give you a more visual picture, IBC has a footprint of 1 by 1.2 meter. If you start at the Cap North in Norway with the first IBC and you put the second IBC beside, you are ending up down in Sicily. And if you start down in Sicily with the drums, line them up, you're going to end up in Norway again. So it's a huge amount of used packaging we are taking back from the market, and we give it new life in the same market. Next page, please. My first message was, have a clear vision and a strategy for execution, and prove every step to be right, and don't be afraid of hurdles, and turn simply challenges into opportunities. But what it also take to become a leader and to become more sustainable is innovation. With Ellen MacArthur's New Plastics Economy, it tells us that 30% of the packaging of the plastics in the marketplace will never be reused or recycled without fundamental innovation. An example from the drum market: once the drum is filled, typically the drums are placed on pallet and transported with 4 pieces on a pallet to the end customer. It's a legal requirement to secure packaging and was to secure goods in transportation. And what is done currently, it's a lot of plastic wrap or straps to secure the drums on the pallet. Next page, please. A small gadget, but makes a big difference. That's a product called Drum Guard. You simply put it on top of the drums. You screw it into the center of the pallet, and you have a fully certified loading unit. But Drum Guard is not a product; it's a concept. Because when the Drum Guard is introduced by our customers into a supply chain, also a return box is provided. So the end user just takes the drum guard off, put the plates into the small cabinets, the long screw in the middle cabinet. And once the return box is full with our collection system, we are taking care that the drum guard can be reused again and again. So it's saving tremendous amount of single-use plastics. Next page. Another small innovation, and it's a challenge of the standard, is utilization of space. We have seen this year especially that transport rates went sky high. Availability of trucks is not there. Availability of containers is very difficult. So we have to utilize the available transport capacity as much as possible. We are currently introducing an IBC designed for ISO container utilization. 2 standard IBCs stacked are a little higher than the entry height of an ISO container. So you have to load the IBCs inside the ISO container. With now having a little lower IBC by an innovative pallet design, you can enter with 20 IBCs the truck, and you can fully utilize the available capacity. The same with the standard open top drum. So the normal global standard is a blue and round open top drum. You're getting 5 pieces of on a pallet. With just a little reshape, make it rectangular, you can load a pallet with 6 pieces, which gives you a 20% better utilization, a 20% less carbon emission, 20% less transport, 20% less costs. The same on the right side, a picture of an ISO drum, 240 liter versus a 260 liter drum. Also here, a much better utilization of space with all the advantages. So my second message, it needs innovation. Thank you.
You indeed got started to make a difference, as your last slide showed. There's quite a bunch of innovations that you presented and quite a transformation of your company. I'm sure we'll come back to that in our discussion at the end of the 4 presentations. Let me now move on to the story of Laura Nieboer, who's going to talk about how SABIC and Tesco have collaborated. So a truly cross-supply chain collaboration. Laura?
Thank you very much, Anne. Yeah, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I have the opportunity to share with you our story about value chain collaboration and to go a bit deeper into a successful showcase for flexible packaging that SABIC did with partners for the retailer Tesco. Next, please. Tesco is a retailer active in the UK, amongst other regions, and we started our pilot in the UK. And there are two opportunities that we identified at the beginning of this case, of which one is very UK specific. And that is that the UK has a limited level of recycling. So compared to the rest of the EU, the UK has a rather high landfill rate, which is, as we see at SABIC, we see a lot of opportunities to do with use mixed plastic. So we saw it as an opportunity to show the potential of giving these use mixed plastics a new value. At the same time, what we see in the UK is that the consumers are amongst the largest plastic consumers of all citizens in the EU. Another opportunity that we identified is that within the European Union, we of course have the ambition to move from a linear economy to a circular one. And the circular economy comes with opportunities for circular business models, of which we believe closed loop is a great example. Next, please. Our partnership with our value chain partners has resulted into a first example in the industry of what closed loop can do for the flexible packaging industry. So we did a trial in the UK with our partners involving the entire value chain and demonstrated that circularity for plastics is possible if all parties in the value chain work together. In 2020, so last year, we introduced flexible packaging, food grade, so safe, as cheese packaging for the Tesco cheese. Well, to go a bit deeper into the exact case, you can see on the right the parties involved in making this value chain collaboration possible. And it's truly all levels of the value chain. So let me start at the bottom with the consumers, where it all starts. Consumers were invited to bring back use mixed packaging to several Tesco stores that were identified to be part of the pilot. That material was collected, and difficult to recycle material, especially flexible material, was selected for advanced recycling. That was done by our partner Plastic Energy, and SABIC then took the oil that comes out of this step to make new certified circular polymers. This material was sold went to Sealed Air, and Sealed Air is a plastic flexible packaging manufacturer who made the sealing that went to Bradbury's, who would package the cheese in the material, and then the packaged cheese would go back to Tesco to be sold in their stores. Next, please. This example of a successful showcase in the market has led to two main impacts, among others, of course, but two I want to highlight today. One being the opportunity to save taxes, because the UK, as a result of also the points I meant as the opportunity, the low levels of recycling, the high plastic consumption, is introducing next year a plastic packaging tax, meaning that materials that are brought to the market need to be made with a minimal of 30% recycled plastic, or otherwise you will receive a tax of 200 British pounds per ton. At the same time, we see an opportunity to contribute to the circular economy by showing that a closed loop is possible, which is of course essential for the circular economy to function. And additionally, the closed loop has also showed us that we can revert some of the CO2 emissions. So our certified circular polymers compared to virgin material have on average a 2 kilogram CO2 equivalent per kilogram of material CO2 reduction. So here we can see the potential for circular business models, as well as the potential to reduce the CO2 footprint of the material. This was an introduction into how a successful showcase, together with all the value chain partners, has led to showing that flexible packaging, which is generally difficult to recycle, can come back as a food grade material on the market and be recycled again and again in this closed loop. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions and the discussion.
Thank you, Laura. Very nice story indeed. And well, remember I said earlier, we can learn and be inspired from retailers. And well, Laura presented the collaboration with Tesco as one example. I also mentioned that we can learn and be inspired from sectors such as the textile industry. And that brings us to our fourth panel member. The fourth panel member is Julie Littard. Julie is at European Spinning Group, and as I mentioned earlier, Julie has been building a true ecosystem from within the textile industry. So Julie, tell us all about it.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Very happy to be here today to represent the textile industry as well. So I wanted to share my story of our family business, European Spinning Group, as well as my startup company, Ariadne Innovation. You can go to the next slide, please. Just as a brief introduction, as we are a new company, European Spinning Group is an SME located in Belgium, and we are active in the production of textile yarns for various applications. So going from home textiles like mattresses, like furniture, as well as outdoor textiles, to fashion and workwear and technical textiles. So our strength is diversification, which of course brings us information about all the topics trending in all those different segments and applications. We are an SME, so we have 95 employees, just to cover the story that follows. Please go to the next slide. Yeah, just as I think the petrochemical industry, the textile industry faces the same challenges of circular economy. This is something we already captured about 5 years ago. The impact, of course, of reducing your product footprint by using recycled materials is also, when you go from textiles to textiles, very large. I have not brought any data, but it has been mentioned already, the amount of waste reduction. If you see really the images of the heaps of textiles that is being collected, it is an issue for the industry. There's a solution that is needed, as well, of course, as the energy, the water use, and the CO2 emissions that are linked to production. So by using recycled materials in your production process and creating a circular loop, you indeed decrease the impact of those materials as well. And of course, when you talk about natural resources, the use of other applications in land areas, as well as closer cooperation in the local supply chain is important for our sector. So a few years ago, we started building or innovating a collection, ESG Green here, that is actually a collection that works with post-consumer recycled textile materials that are collected and that are rebrought into textile applications. So how to give a second life to a pair of jeans. Can go to the next slide, please. So actually, instead of just doing and staying at the product development side, we actually felt that there was a huge need in the market of, sharing the story, telling how the supply chain works, what the impact is of using recycled materials in the end product, and also showing to the consumer we are a raw material supplier in the value chain. So it's really tough for us to communicate with end customers and consumers as well. So we created an internal project called Hack Your Jeans, a hashtag, where we communicate and try to create awareness on the use of recycled materials in an end textile product and how the circular economy works. So really, we are building this together with partners in the ecosystem, which are direct customers, weavers and knitters, but as well the end users and the product designers, to really show how this loop can work with concrete industrial cases as a result already. So from the one side, we create this awareness, and the second point is really to co-create with all different type of applications products to show to the consumer what is possible, what qualities are possible based on recycled materials. You see some numbers here for European Spinning Group, ESG. It has really been a growth project, which is leading, of course, to a lot more impact than we thought at first we would have in the sustainable ecosystem. And if you go to the next slide, it's really this kind of ecosystem communication. Hack Your Genes was an ecosystem of about 20 partners, which is rather limited. Of course, if you look at the textile industry, there are certain big players, but most of the industry is really made out of SME players, production companies that really, they don't have the means of doing large innovation projects or finding right partners. And definitely when you talk about sustainability, most of them or a lot of them got lost. So we really made it a mission of inspiring the ecosystem to also find the right partners in the ecosystem, the correct information to really start this project. And 1 year ago, thanks to digital technology that was built on an artificial intelligence platform, we launched our startup Ariadne Innovation, really to scale up and to make this inspiration information broader. So if you go to the next slide, you show here just a screenshot of a digital platform that we have launched beginning this year, which connects all the players in the textile ecosystem, going from raw material suppliers to collectors, sorters, to spinners, weavers, designers, to end-of-life providers, recyclers, again, to really work on sharing knowledge and bridging the knowledge gap that is there sometimes. So we try to inspire, inform, and connect parties in the ecosystem. And if you go to the next slide, please, this shows a little bit the journey of how to build up an ecosystem when you're really an individual company, having your direct partners, suppliers, and customers where you work with, towards growing within the Hack Your Genes network to speak to parties like social economy, even designers, universities, material and machine constructors, to really building, Ellie Connect, which is the name of our digital platform, to create impact in the whole textile value chain. So it's a startup company we just launched this year, but we already have more than 250 partners who are following all the new trends and topics on sustainability in the textile and fashion industry. So we really hope we can, inspire and really create this kind of flow of ideas. I noted down this topic. I think it was a very nice way of saying that ideas need to be flowing in the full ecosystem of an industry or even cross industries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie, and a very nice story indeed. It's nice to see how impressive that ecosystem is that you've built, and I'm sure we can learn from it. Time for a bit of a debate with our panel members. I'm happy to have all four of you on my screen here now. Mark Noordhoek, I'm going to start with you. I have a question for you. Actually, based on your experience, we've been talking a lot now for more than an hour about improving sustainability of the supply chain. From your experience, how can data sharing improve it? Can you give us one or two examples of where you have witnessed it?
Yeah, sure. I think I can give two examples that are now actually happening. Firstly, when we achieve real-time transparency, which means real visibility of the actual status in the supply chain, the planning and scheduling of activities between all supply chain partners can be much better aligned and optimized. For example, when a vessel is calling a port and scheduling multiple loading and discharging operations at multiple jetties, we've seen that when all parties are really kept up to date about the real-time status, the planning of activities becomes more predictable. And first results that we now see show that up to 30% faster turnaround is possible just by sharing real-time data. So not changing anything in the process, but just sharing real-time data. And unnecessary vessel movements can be avoided, and idle time can be eventually reduced to zero. And so these are two efficiency gains implicitly reduce actually carbon emissions. The second one is where we see parties using a CO2 calculator, where the captain of a vessel can manage his voyage at economical speed and reducing unnecessary emissions during voyage. And arriving at the port, we can measure CO2 and VOC emissions through a network of e-noses. And ultimately, we can measure our theoretical and actual carbon footprint and take this information into account while making short-term and long-term decisions in the supply chain.
These are interesting examples, Mark, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in addition to reducing emissions, it seems to me that they are also reducing cost. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the real-time visibility makes it possible to align your planning, align your resources, and asset utilization, which eventually definitely leads to bottom line cost reduction.
So what we often see as a trade-off, it's either you go for the ecological improvement or you aim for cost. Actually, the two can be combined, is what your story tells me.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
All right, nice, thank you. I also have a question for Mark Loeffler. Actually, Mark, you talked about how your company took the lead in moving from a linear to a circular supply chain, and I can imagine that it did require quite some effort and some investment to make this move and to truly transform your company. Now, investments only work if customers follow. Can you share with us how easy or how difficult it was to convince your customers to adopt this idea of, in your case, the reusable packaging?
Sure. Yeah, definitely a mixed picture. I mean, when we started our journey, sustainability was for most of the companies nothing than a buzzword. It showed up and at their web pages, but it had almost no influence on their business behavior. I mean, showing the advantages of reuse, it became obvious related to cost, because there was also a cost advantage, and we used this as a motivator for changes. I'm saying a mixed picture because we had other companies, especially the smaller ones, and that was a comment Mr. Kohlpaintner made today, that innovation is easier with smaller companies. Dealing with multinationals, you have multiple stakeholders, multiple people taking a decision, and that was in the beginning quite a challenge, but we made it through. So you have to prove the concept with good arguments, with data sharing, showing that it works, and then you go step by step.
Okay, so a step-by-step conviction of your customers to go along. Laura, your story of collaborating with Tesco, with partners downstream in the supply chain, that to me also doesn't sound like a very obvious one to get started. If I can get Laura with me in the panel now, what I wonder is what has triggered the the project for you. So how did you actually identify the partners to work with, or very specifically in your case, how did you come across Tesco as a partner? Did SABIC take the initiative? Did Tesco take the initiative? So how did that work?
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Those are a lot of questions to unpack, but I think I'll be able to touch upon all of them. So what we see as an opportunity, or what we think is crucial if you want to set up such a collaborative value chain partnership, is that you have a deep understanding of the industry that you participate in, that you know well which value chain partners are active, what they're doing, what they're focusing on. Because as you described earlier, we are so as SABIC, so at the beginning of the value chain, but for this to work, we need to work even together with brand owners, retailers like at Tesco. So we need to understand every single step from us till the end, and then how can we close the loop to get the material back to its origin. And to do that, you need to understand the value chain. So that's step one that I could kind of advise on where to start, have that good understanding. And then for SABIC, how did this specific case with Tesco start? We actually send out an open invitation, just making clear in our industry that we were interested in doing such a closed loop, and just asking several of our partners, which are our direct partners, which are generally the converters, like a Sealed Air, and express to them we're interested to do this in a broader market and to look at all parties. And actually together we found we found the partners that I presented before, and together we sat at the table and said, okay, well, we're all interested in doing this, so let's give it a go and do a pilot. But it is important that you find parties that are willing to collaborate, because this is really about collaboration, right? Not just some face front. You need to be really, really willing to collaborate and break out of the conventional business models and look into the circular business models. And at the same time, you need to look for each party. Is it attractive to make a connection? Is there value for each party to build the bridge between each other? Is there a value that can be gained out of it? Because in the end, you're exploring something new, so you do need to make that strong connection and that strong willingness to make it work. So I would say, find those early adopters, those eager parties in your industry that are willing to sit down with you at the table to explore the opportunities to do, for example, a closed loop. And in our case, especially with the flexible packaging overall is quite difficult to recycle. So you also need to be able to have the technological capabilities to make that closed loop function.
Okay, all right, thank you. And actually it makes me wonder, if we think about the story that we heard from Julie, a bit of a similar story, Julie. You also had to get partners on board, you had to motivate them, you had to identify them, find them to partner up with. Plus, and Laura mentions technology as being important. I assume that also on your side, having that capability, those competencies for adopting digital technologies must have been important. So can you comment on that?
Yes. I think the huge benefit we have is that we started from being a physical ecosystem that we are transforming or trying to transform to a virtual one, to a digital one. So we don't start as a digital company as we were already active in the textile business, which was a huge benefit. I agree with what Laura was saying. You have to start with your ambassadors, with your first movers who want to join in this, which was the Hack Your Jeans community, who want to try out the digital technology as well. And from there on, it's really like building or growing very organically, depending on what the challenges were that were presented, looking for the right partners, which actually were trying to build an algorithm to also identify who is the best match for that as well. See it as a kind of a Tinder for sustainable textiles or something. But we are facing problems with the fact that a lot of these companies where there's older generations who are not yet that digital savvy. So you feel that the younger generation who is actually very much acquainted to using social media networks to connect to people, that those are really the generations that are interested in starting up with our platform as well. But actually, it's a benefit as well, because this way we can also, attract these younger generations towards our textile industry, which has had a negative image as well for the last year. So by showing that we're digitally advanced as well, and that we have impact in a sustainable way, it also attracts younger people to all the partners of our ecosystem. So that's kind of a side benefit, but really crucial one.
That's not an obvious one in this today's war for talent. That's a nice one as a side benefit, indeed. I'm going to ask a last question before I turn to the audience and we tackle their questions. But I'm going to go back to Mark Noothoek. I've heard especially Laura and Julie talk about getting producers on board, getting textile players on board, getting a retailer on board, even getting consumers on board. You, from the perspective of managing such a platform, it seems like almost an impossible task to get them all on board and to connect them right from the start. So what would be your advice if we want to get started?
Yeah, very good question. What we see today is that there is a great amount of parties active and finding themselves on a digital transformation journey. And as we also could see from the presentations of my fellow panelists and the questions that they answered, is that the trick is really to start small. So because even the smallest step can give an improvement to the daily work of a frontline executor in production and supply chain processes. So digitizing these steps one by one will generate real-time information and possibly automate mundane manual steps. And you avoid double handling of information. I think that's also an important step. And so people really feel immediate benefits from taking those small steps. And the real-time information generated through digitizing these steps is, I think, of great interest to your supply chain partners and your customer. And in order that not all of us will invent the wheel and spend time and money to digitize our own processes and build our own customized applications, we can make actually use of a wide variety of applications already available in the market. And we try to get all those applications onboarded on our platform. And so these applications offer direct digital services and data products that the market is looking for. And this way we can experience an acceleration by making small steps very quickly. And so I think that's the trick.
So start small, make small steps, make them quickly, and use what is available to do that. That's good advice, Mark. Thank you. I'm actually watching at the questions that we get from the audience, and I see that there's a question to Mark Loeffler. The question is, if we claim that you've taken the lead, which I'm sure you have, it does mean probably that others are following. So there's a leader, there's followers. So I think this is kind of a question that asks us for, okay, what is the journey? If you look into the future, you took the lead, you've been leaping forward, and do you feel others are following? And for your company, what is the journey, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is the journey? We will continue that journey. We are not there. We are constantly working on new business models, on further circular economy, and we have taken initiatives to to allow that, for example, with the IBC. And for that, we need also our peers, because the IBC was regulated by the UN Orange Book, so it was prohibited to use PCR for UN-approved IBC. So we aligned with our industry association. We proved the concept to be right, and with our industry association and competent authority, we approached the UN subcommittee with the result that the new Orange Book revision 2021 has changed, and now it's allowed to produce also UN-approved IBCs with PCR content, and also our peers are coming along that direction. So yeah.
So basically, you're saying this is an innovation that got picked up by others, and that is now finding its way into what others do as well. Okay. I also see a question for Laura. Your story of the collaboration with Tesco apparently has spoken to the imagination and has sounded like an attractive story to quite a few people. And I see a question coming about somebody saying, I had no idea that SABIC was involved in this. So why not publicize the fact that your company, SABIC, is involved in it? So I think this is a question that asks about if you do that and you do put effort into this, which you obviously did, how important is it to actually give that message to the outside world? What's your opinion on that, Laura?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and I do think it's also a valid one, because indeed, if we can use this story to inspire others and therefore catalyze the change towards a circular economy, then that should be, of course, done, because then we can show together that these successful showcases actually can happen, and that step by step, with all the challenges that we overcome together, we can build these circular value chains. I do think, as a side note, and I'm pretty sure more in the audience will experience that too, SABIC is a company that comes from all the way at the start of the value chain. Our level of communication and our standard level of communication is more towards the industry. It's less towards, for example, the end consumers or brand owners. But I do think it's something that is changing, because as we're moving more out of our position and the linear supply chain, moving more into our circular position, also innovation and changes with regards to the way we communicate. And I think that holds for every party in the value chain is going to change. But we should indeed not forget where we're coming from and where we're moving towards to, and every step takes time. So I'm glad that at events like these, we're able to share our story and hopefully inspire others. So I do encourage, if parties are interested, that they reach out to us, and then of course we can further explore and discuss. Because in the end, yeah, these successful showcases, especially in our case for difficult to recycle plastics, is, I would believe, the way forward to building a circular economy together.
Okay, all right. And indeed, I think it's a fair question that we have to think about communicating what we do to the consumer, but also to other actors in the chain. I do see another question, and probably our last question, or one but last question coming up, that opens a whole box, I think, of possible discussions, and that is if we how can we incentivize data sharing, is what one of us is saying, in a responsible way at a time where more and more we are concerned about privacy as consumers, privacy of our data. And maybe I should add security as well of our data. So how can, it's probably a question that I should ask Mark to take on? No, you're muted again, Mark.
Sorry, Anne, can you quickly repeat the question?
Well, the question is, we talk about data sharing, and we mention it's important, so let's do it. But what about privacy of data? Consumers being more and more concerned about that. I'm also going to ask the same question to Julie. I guess you probably also have some experience on that.
No, definitely. And I think technologies today are available as we use them every day on our own on our own cell phones. And so identity access management and ways to have a digital connection which is safe and secure are available, and that's what we invest in quite heavily, because that's the most important one. It starts with the trust, trusting the connection you have between data user and data provider before you can actually make an exchange. So that is absolute of paramount importance, that privacy of our own private and public data is ensured.
Okay. Julie, any insights you want to give into this question?
Yes. Yeah, I think it is definitely an issue. When you start up a platform, I can say that all the regulations that you have to follow concerning personal data are very strict. We are a B2B platform, so that means that we are not raising any personal data from the consumer side. It's really a B2B platform where we use marketing data, and actually it is the user themselves who are sharing the data. The thing we communicate and are very open about is what we do with the data, where it is used, and for which applications that it's necessary. So we really try to manage this. We are working with an external technology partner for this, who is certified. So for this, we are sure that we have the right technology partner on board as well. And then I think it's really a means of making good agreements and communicating to your user group what you are doing with the data and what you will not be doing. It's also, for us, it's very crucial, because as we are claiming values of sustainability, this is of course of utmost importance that the data is not used for unsustainable measures. So definitely, but it is I think for every or each internet or digital company, it is a challenge to manage.
Yeah, and actually you raise a good point. Sustainability, we talked about it from the planet perspective, but there's also a people perspective to it. Let's not forget that. And I think with this last question, that nice extra dimension was added to it. I think it's about time to wrap up now, and I want to sincerely thank my panel here, Mark, Laura, Julie. Thank you for sharing your experience with us, and for sharing your enthusiasm to make the supply chain more sustainable. Your enthusiasm is also what I sensed in the workshops. So I'm optimistic after today's session that there's a lot that we can and that we will change while reimagining our supply chain. So to the studio, if I could have my final slides here, then I can wrap up with just a few conclusions and messages. Let me wave at our panel members while we're waiting for the slides to come up. Looks like that takes a bit of time, but let me, I actually had a slide showing the enthusiasm that I also sensed during the workshops. Remember, I told you about the 2 workshops with representatives from all over the supply chain. And what they told me, yeah, this is what I was asking for. So if I could have the next slide. I have just 3 quotes that I captured during these workshops that I wanted to share with you. And the one I like most is the one in the middle. Somebody was saying, well, what we're talking about, it's a dream, but dreaming is good. Now that I think is a nice thing to take with us. And what I take away from our panel members is, yes, dreaming is good. And if I can have the next slide, please, we should probably dream big. But, and now I'm rephrasing what Mark has said, let's start small. It's good to dream big, but we have to get started. So let's start small, step by step, and let's scale fast. And that'd be my message to you. I hope that with the session of today, we did give you the inspiration. We did make you dream quite a bit about what could be possible, but we also gave you some insights on how to get started, and once you got started, to scale up and move fast. And I want to actually close this session from my side with one statement from one of the many people that I talked to throughout this project. And you see the statement on the next slide, please. The person was telling me, next please, that it takes vision and courage to move away from our traditional supply chain focus, which is typically on operational performance, where we're used to balancing cost and service. So let's move away from that, and let's focus on designing a supply chain that serves the world best. Let that be our dream in terms of long-term sustainable performance. And as you have heard throughout the examples that we gave this afternoon, I think you've heard that it's not either or, it's not either cost or more care for the planet. It could easily be both if we look carefully for good ideas. So I'm going to close on this note. I hope we've inspired you. I hope you will have some ideas that you can adopt and you can implement in your supply chain. Thank you very much.